You have to make sure that who you're targeting, they've told you what their problem is, and all you're doing is just regurgitating back to them the language that they've used to describe their problem, and then talk about your solution.
Well, hey, Amanda here, and welcome back to the Amanda Kaufman Show. I am so excited to welcome a fellow local entrepreneur. Carrolee Moore is joining me today. She is an award-winning speaker, marketing strategist, and CEO of the Podcast Pitching Society. I love that. So good. She helps underrepresented experts gain visibility and attract qualified leads through strategic podcast guesting. Well, how perfect is that? You're a guest on my podcast today. Carrolee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Amanda. And I love that we just found out that we live probably 45, 50 minutes away from each other.
Kind of pops. Crazy. And like that is not as common as you would think, you know, when you get into, there's a reason I'm an online entrepreneur. So I love it. Well, Carrolee, I'm just so excited about what you're going to share with us around podcasting today. But before we get like into the nitty-gritty, I'd just really love to know why Podcast Pitching Society? What led you to that as your key focus in your business?
Well, for me, this all started when I was young, right? And I'm actually Jamaican, born, raised there. Don't let the accent fool you. And a huge part of my culture, a huge part of my childhood was my family coming together and just telling stories. We'd sit for hours and you'd have the storytellers of the family with just dramatic stories and people laughing. They had these things called duppy stories, which were like scary stories. Didn't like those that much, but like I enjoyed that whole thing. And so when I moved here in 98, the way that I tried to kind of get into the culture was through movies, music, like the typical kind of storytelling aspects of the culture, to try and understand and frankly to fit in and stop being mercilessly bullied by my classmates. And so really from that point on up and through college, I was obsessed with anything that had to do with storytelling. So writing poetry, all of those things came naturally to me. Graduate school and in regular undergraduate communications, writing, English, all of those things were there. What shifted though is I graduated in the middle of a recession, and that voice of like, be responsible, get a job that will pay, even though it won't. I ended up at McKesson in project management, the complete opposite of that, and stayed there for quite a few years actually. And cut to, probably 12 years later, I had been working in kind of straight-laced jobs in sales, some marketing, but on the side, I was building a fairly thriving graphic design business as a side hustle. And eventually, of course, they find out that you can do all these things, and so it starts to seep into your job. So by the time I left corporate, I was actually responsible for telling the stories of the organizations that I was a part of. When I left corporate, I made the decision to move from Massachusetts, where I had been living for over 30 years at that point, to Texas. Sight unseen, I had never been to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I had no friends, no family, no church connections, absolutely nothing. I was just kind of told, I'm a believer. I believe that the Holy Spirit kind of led me to this area. And so when I got here with almost no money, no connections, no anything, again, I just decided to go into storytelling. I built my business by building relationships and telling my story to people and helping them tell their stories. So working with small businesses do that. So I built that first business from an air mattress in my living room to a multi-six-figure business simply just by telling stories. And I found podcast guesting through that. I found speaking through that. And then I burnt out. And so I spent a few months after closing down that agency and letting go of my entire team, which had been up to that point around 8 or 9 people, really doing some soul searching, but also asking the questions to different experts that I knew. Hey, what do you actually really need? Not what I think you need or what you want, but what do you need in order to make your business, 10x, 5x, etc. And in different ways, they all kind of said visibility.
Yeah,
And so
that's a
I
big one.
decided, yeah, I decided to build my business around answering that specific question. How do I get real experts visibility that not only makes them look good or gets people to know who they are, but actually pays off in like bottom line revenue? And I thought about how I do podcast guesting and started kind of offering not only the service to get people booked, but training them on how to tell stories that convert, that are not super salesy, right? That you have a through line. Now,
Mm.
if anyone's listening right now, I just told a story. The linchpin is storytelling, right? I talked to you about all the things that I've done. So you're hearing my experience. And you also now are tying it directly to what I do specifically, right?
But
It's not salesy. You didn't feel, attacked. You weren't thinking I was coming into your living room with my thing ready for a sale, right? But that's the point of this, right? Where you're getting in front of the folks that you believe are your unique target audience and talking about what you do in a way that gets them excited to connect with you.
I love it. I love it. And so thank you so much for that story. And I love asking entrepreneurs about their origins. And, one of the things that came up for me as you were telling that story is I'm like, man, it really is like a rite of passage when people build an expert business. At first, we start with what we think the world needs. And then, you can go pretty far for a long time pursuing that thing that you are so sure that the world needs. And one day you'll level up. And that level up is exactly what you did, which was you got to ask, right? Like have the real conversation, survey, like what's the perspective of the market that you want to serve? And then, kind of come back to, okay, how does my genius and my desire match to what people actually want? I'm so curious when you did that, when you made that adjustment to ask, right, what people wanted, was business easier for you? I couldn't help but notice you're still in business.
Yeah. Um, I'll just give you an example. The first month that we officially launched, because I tiptoed my way into launching this business, I'm gonna be honest. I
Yeah.
had been tweaking, as we do,
Mhm.
tweaking my way into oblivion. And my coach was like, or you could just, sell it.
I like your coach.
Yeah. I went to a conference actually in Atlanta. And from that one conference in 2 days, I made over $21,000 as like
Very well
a
done.
6 month, or at that time it was a 3 month contract basis, right? And so that first month in business with this one, collected over 5 figures.
That's
First
it.
month.
And you went to just to underline this part of the story,
Yeah.
you went to a conference and met people you did not know and walked away after 2 days with $21,000 of business.
And
And
it's
yeah,
again connected to storytelling. I cannot
so
tell
it is.
you how important it is for you to develop messaging that is going to it cuts to the heart of what people are really feeling, right? And when we think about visibility, a lot of times people are thinking about social media. And like when it comes down to it, the folks that I like working with, when I say an expert, someone who's been doing the do for 15, 20 years, they probably hate social media. Why? Because they can talk for 3 hours about the thing that they're really passionate about. And social media is forcing you to kind of do this. And if you don't know how to do it well, it doesn't really get any traction. And so therefore you think something is wrong with you and wrong with like whatever, when in fact it's just the vehicle that you're using. Right. And so for
Mhm.
visibility, when I talk to our experts, I'm like, a podcast is probably one of the best ways for any expert to really showcase what it is that they do and how they do it, whatever. But a conference, going to a conference that has a bunch of your ideal clients in the room that have already been qualified, they're already on, like, they know they're about to be sold to by whoever is running that conference. So they're ready, pocketbooks open, most of them. It's ripe for the picking. If you know what you're doing and you get in there, it's ripe for the picking. I had no idea. I can't tell you. I was like, yeah, I knew I was going to make all this money at this. No idea, because I had no idea whether the concept would work. I knew people wanted it. I hoped that it would work, But then when I saw that it worked, when I saw that the messaging was like spot on and then we kept tweaking it, it's like, absolutely. So, like, that is the first thing. You have to make sure that who you're targeting, they've told you what their problem is, and all you're doing is just regurgitating back to them the language that they've used to describe their problem, and then talk about your solution.
And we launched earlier this year our first 5 club for coaches, and the whole tenet, the whole principle behind the community and what we're doing there is it's all about getting, you know, I don't just call it this, it's generally called the MVP, right? The minimum viable product. And it's like the general philosophy is if it's easy to sell, and especially if it's easy to sell to a stranger. So when I say easy, I mean like you don't have to do backflips. You don't have to do the crazy psychology. You don't have to know any NLP. You just make the offer. And if the offer is really good, then it's easy to sell,
Yes.
and personally, I find it a little easier to fulfill on offers that are also easy to sell because everybody's on the same page about what are we here to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're all clear on that, then boom, we're in business, literally in business. So podcast guesting, talk to me a little bit about your top recommendations. First of all, maybe let's take a second and define what it is. I think a lot of entrepreneurs think, I have to have a podcast. And, I'll tell you what, having a podcast, so rewarding. Love it. And it's also one of my very intentional decisions about how I want to create and express content in the world. And it takes a team, it takes effort, it takes consistency. We have a bunch of automation that we've set up in the back to make sure that our guests are well taken care of. Like there's quite a bit that goes into actually hosting a podcast. Now, technically, it's also a $5 subscription at like Libsyn or something like that. You're off to the races. The podcast is published. But what makes a good podcast is
Mm-hmm.
one that people listen to, and that's where all the work of like owning the podcast comes in that people are generally unprepared for. So, can you take a beat and just define for us, well, what's podcast guesting? Why should this be something that an entrepreneur is prioritizing, especially if maybe they're busy and they're having a hard time keeping up with the social media, the email marketing, and having a fully integrated digital marketing strategy, which takes time to build.
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say this, your back end is so tight.
Thank you.
It was an incredible experience for me because I do a lot of these to kind of see your process come through. And I'm also a podcaster myself. So seeing that, I felt well taken care of. So I just want to say kudos to you and your team for creating that level of experience. I know how much work that takes. So I want to give you your props like on wax so people can hear it. It's incredible. So
Thank you.
that's that one. Podcast guesting is now becoming a true marketing channel. Before, it was just kind of like the thing that you would do to have conversations, and it was nice, super formal for the most part. And then there were like the sleazy, salesy people. Right? It was these
I've
two
had
very,
that experience. Yeah.
yeah.
I'd love to unpack that one too a little bit, but keep going.
So that was what it was for a while. And I think now there is this nuance that is being found in the middle, especially for business owners. So podcast guesting is not new. What is new, like I said, is that now that it's being kind of considered a marketing channel, a true marketing channel. To use it as a marketing channel, you need the same tenets that you would need for any other marketing channel. We've
Hmm.
been talking about an offer. You need an offer, you need a good offer. You need to understand who your target audience is. And it's newsflash, not everybody, right? So figuring out who your target audience is, figuring out what your offer is, and then thinking through what the messaging is. What are the things that you really want to use to showcase what you do? We actually call this your PowerPoint. So in podcast guesting, a lot of people come in and they're either, like we talked about, super salesy and ridiculous, or it's great conversation, but it leads to absolutely like nowhere, right? What we teach our clients is to actually create a PowerPoint. A PowerPoint is a 3-layered cake. At the core, bottom of this cake, to hold it all in there, ironically, is storytelling, right? That's the foundation, is the stories that you tell. You put in here now your expertise and you have some weight. to this cake. And then you put on top of that your offer, and it's the cherry on the top, right?
So good.
And
I
so
love the visual. Yeah, that's a good
I'm
visual.
also a fatty in like a skinny person's body. I like desserts. Hence
Yeah,
why
I'm the other kind, but I like cake.
hence why our framework is actually literally called cake, which is terrible. But
So
for me, it
good. Here
works.
for it all day long.
That is literally what you need to do. And so if you go back and even listen to the first part of this conversation, you can hear me doing some of that already. Even though I haven't gotten super specific on like client case study, casework and all this other stuff, you use that as a guest to showcase specific things. We talk a lot as business owners about know, like, and trust. And that PowerPoint, if you're using it over and over throughout the conversation, will shorten that. People will start to like you, right? Have good conversation. They'll start to trust you because you're giving like actionable tips and things that people can actually use. And it's not just like fluff, or like I call it, like lukewarm advice. It's like, okay, I could have read that on like 10 different social media posts, as I open it.
Yeah, no, it's true.
It is more and more now you're seeing a hunger for like true opinions. What do I mean by true opinions? People are looking for you to stand 10 toes down on something that will split a room. You're either going to completely agree or completely disagree. Those are the types of messages that are working right now. Whether we agree or not that that should be the case, that is what's happening. It's a very polarized world. It's not just the US, it's not just even about politics. Kind of think about how we see the world at this point. There's not a lot of grays right now. Everyone is
Mm.
kind of choosing sides no matter what it is. And if you come across as someone who's just like stuck in the middle, kind of left behind or ignored, and as an expert, someone who's been in the industry, right? If you're podcast guesting, you need to make it clear, hey, this is where I stand. Anti-social content marketing is not just like my shtick. It is literally, I don't like social media. And I have never liked social media. And I wanted to figure out a way to build my business where it wasn't completely dependent on it. And I figured it out. And now I'm choosing to now like give that same game to other people, right? So that is my, hill to die on, if you will. And
That's so good.
it's based around science. It's based around things, because I'm a nerd, around how people are choosing to commune at this point. What does community look like now? And I feel like social media has completely demolished that. And I do see a move away from a real need for social media to feel connected. I see people going back to like real meetings and going outside and touching grass. You're seeing more of
Yeah,
that.
there's like there's certainly a lot. Look, there's so many ways that you can promote your business,
Yeah.
and 10 toes digging deep in. I don't totally agree, but that's why I have these conversations, right? Because there's lots of different perspectives, and I do think there's so much value in focus. And I love how what you've done is you've got this channel and you've really dug deep, because I think the thing that a lot of people maybe have the expectation of is that I can just do a short form reel in my car and I'm suddenly going to be a millionaire. And my personal philosophy, 10 toes deep, is you need an integrated strategy. Social media, like it or not, more people are spending more time on there, but I agree with you, the content is not so good. And what I love, love, love about your strategy is that when you do this well, when you're able to be a great guest because you've got the cake, guess what gets easier? Right. And I think the problem with social media for most is that they're trying to begin with social media and build a reputation that way. And the truth is that the very best people at social media, and PS all media, they have a core that they are, announcing from, and social media is just another channel. And you're right, it does require different skill sets in addition to the core that you've done such a beautiful, beautiful job of walking us through. So Carolee, I'm like, not to argue on the show, but like actually, yeah, to argue a little. But I think the thing is that dear listener, it's not easy. If it was just one straight answer, then you would probably have that and everybody would be following that one way. So if we don't have the discussion, then there's no way to get like another perspective and look at a different way. Oh, yeah, so good. I'm so curious. You've obviously unpacked a lot around the podcast guesting, the benefit of it, the process that you take people through. This is just a tremendously valuable episode. So I just want to start off by saying thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm excited.
Yeah,
This is what I love to
yeah,
talk about. I'm the
me
person
too.
who's like, let me go for 3 hours. It's like, okay.
I know these tight little episodes can
Right.
sometimes be tough, but
Go ahead.
if people wanted to follow you, what would be the best way to do that?
Best way to do that is definitely LinkedIn. That is my kind of core place that I'm in right now. If you are listening to this and you are either starting your podcast guesting journey or you're on it but you're not really getting the shows that you would like, or you're sure there's a better way to do what you're doing, we actually have a mini course, and it's a free mini course, and it is hyperlinked on my LinkedIn profile. So twofer, we get to connect and be friends, and then you also get that free resource. So would love for.
That's tremendous. That's really outstanding that you're offering that. And I understand you have a new podcast coming out. Is there anything that you can tell us about what you're cooking up?
Absolutely. Super, super excited about this. So this podcast is called The Currency of Visibility, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We're
That's
talking
a
about
great title. Wow.
trademarking it as we speak.
There you go. Exactly.
So that particular podcast is very similar to this, right? Where you're having people come on, talk about the things that they're experts in, and giving tangible advice that the audience could then use and build whatever they're building better, right? So the idea of currency connected to visibility, that you're not just doing the things, whether it's social media, email, etc., just to do them. You are actually thinking about the bottom line of it all, right? So we're
Mhm.
not just kind of pointing on whatever on TikTok and like doing the thing. What does it actually mean for the bottom line, and how can you create kind of a cohesive plan? So we'll have people on there that have built multi seven figure businesses using TikTok, but specific way that she did that. People that
That's
have,
it. Yep.
yeah, exactly. People have done events and built a multi seven figure business using events and speaking live. People who've done corporate contracts and done that. Like, so I really want to get people an understanding of visibility is not this kind of one little thing. I think we've kind of stuck on the social media piece. I want to broaden that conversation and bring people that have like real success to show folks like, hey, you can do this differently, right? So super
Totally.
excited
Yeah.
about it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that.
1,000%, 1,000%. And I do like maintain that I think that social media is a really, really important strategy. But I think the thing that I love about your strategy is it gives people a way to open doors. The way that social media really does help you is to nurture relationships that you've already established. And it is so hard. I completely agree here that it's challenging to use that algorithm to expand your following with people who are perfect for your offer. Whereas when somebody's listening to a podcast, like that's such an intentional decision. And when somebody's decided to undertake the effort like you're doing with the currency of visibility, you're taking care of the promotion. You're taking care of the right people being able to see it. So then, being a guest, it helps you because then you've got lots more content, right? But it also helps the guest because then they get to, accelerate things past kind of the natural expansion of your network, whether it's offline, online, all the lines. But I love what you're doing. I think it's so super cool. And dear listener, if you love this, if you found this to be really helpful and a powerful conversation, make sure you grab the link and share it with 3 of your friends. You can just text it to them and let them have a listen for another way that they can gain that visibility. The frameworks that Carrolee taught in this session were just so powerful. Also, we're going to have more episodes. So you might want to hit subscribe if you haven't already. And you know what? If you just feel like going that extra mile, 30 seconds to leave us a review. My gosh, if a picture was worth 1,000 words, a review is worth a million because it just helps people to choose to listen to this show of the lots of options that they have out there. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. And in the meantime, until the next episode, make sure you do what matters.